The autumn rain fell in sheets against the windshield of the black Mercedes as it wound its way through the narrow country roads of Vermont, each turn bringing Alexander Ashford deeper into a landscape he had spent 5 years trying to forget. The wipers beat a relentless rhythm, a metronome marking time lost, opportunities squandered, and a love abandoned in the pursuit of empire. He had built that empire brick by brick, dollar by dollar, until his name became synonymous with success in the gleaming towers of Manhattan. Yet here he was, returning to the one place where his wealth meant nothing, where his carefully constructed persona would crumble like autumn leaves beneath his expensive Italian shoes. The GPS announced his arrival in that impersonal, mechanical voice that characterized so much of his existence now. Hartwell Farm. Even the name stirred something in his chest, a sensation he had long ago learned to suppress in boardrooms and hostile takeover meetings. He slowed the vehicle, peering through the rain-blurred windows at the wooden sign that hung slightly askew on its post, weathered by 5 winters and 5 summers without his presence. The paint had faded, but the letters remained legible, carved deep into the wood by hands that valued permanence over perfection. Her hands, perhaps. The thought made him grip the steering wheel harder. The driveway stretched before him like a gauntlet, rutted and muddy from the recent rains, a far cry from the pristine asphalt of his Park Avenue residence. Alexander hesitated, the engine idling, his foot hovering between brake and accelerator. What madness had possessed him to come here? His attorney could have handled the matter of the inheritance, the legal documents that brought him back to this god-forsaken corner of New England. But no. He had insisted on delivering them himself, had manufactured excuses that rang hollow even to his own ears. Business in Boston, he had told his assistant. A desire to see the countryside, he had told himself. But the truth, the unvarnished truth that he dared not speak aloud, was that 5 years had not been enough to exorcise her ghost from his thoughts. He pressed the accelerator and the Mercedes lurched forward, protesting the indignity of the rough terrain. The main house came into view gradually, emerging from behind a stand of maples whose leaves blazed red and gold in defiance of the grey sky. It was smaller than he remembered, or perhaps his perspective had shifted, warped by years of measuring worth in square footage and market value. The white clapboard siding showed signs of age, though it appeared well maintained, and smoke rose from the chimney in lazy spirals that spoke of warmth and habitation. His heart, that treacherous organ he had thought thoroughly disciplined, began to race. The porch light flickered on as if in response to his approach, though he knew it must be motion-activated, a concession to modern practicality that seemed oddly out of place in this setting. He parked beside an old pickup truck that had not been there 5 years ago, its bed filled with equipment he could not identify. Farming implements, no doubt. Evidence of a life lived in his absence. Choices made without his input or approval. The arrogance of that thought struck him immediately, and he felt a flush of shame that had nothing to do with the November chill. Alexander sat in the car for a long moment, engine running, heat blasting, postponing the inevitable. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see movement inside the house, shadows passing before the lit windows like figures in a lantern show. His hand moved to the door handle 3 times before he finally marshaled the courage to step out into the weather. The rain immediately began soaking through his cashmere overcoat, an $8,000 garment that was spectacularly unsuited for the elements. He grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat and made a run for the porch, his leather shoes slipping on the wet earth, nearly sending him sprawling in a manner that would have delighted his competitors and appalled his shareholders. He reached the shelter of the porch and stood there, breathing hard, feeling foolish and overwhelmed in equal measure. The door before him was painted a deep green, the color of summer leaves, and bore a wreath of dried flowers and wheat that must have been recently placed, for it showed no signs of weather damage. His hand rose to knock, then hesitated. What would he say? How did one begin a conversation after 5 years of silence, 5 years of absence, so profound it amounted to abandonment? The rehearsed speeches he had prepared on the drive from New York seemed suddenly inadequate, the words of a stranger attempting to explain the inexplicable. Before he could gather his thoughts, the door swung open, and there she stood, Emma Hartwell, though she had nearly become Emma Ashford before he had destroyed that possibility with his ambition and his pride. The years had touched her, but gently, like an artist adding depth to an already beautiful portrait. Her dark hair, which she had once worn long and loose, was now gathered in a practical braid that hung over one shoulder. Her face, that face he had seen in his dreams more often than he cared to admit, bore new lines at the corners of her eyes and mouth. Laugh lines that suggested a happiness he had not been present to witness. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, mud on her boots, and looked more vital, more real than any woman in his Manhattan circles with their designer clothes and carefully curated appearances. Alexander. His name on her lips was neither welcoming nor hostile, but rather carried a note of resignation, as if his appearance, while unexpected, was somehow inevitable. I wondered if you would come yourself, or send someone. Emma. He found his voice was rougher than intended, scraped raw by emotions he had thought long buried. I hope I'm not intruding. The inheritance, the papers, they require a signature. I thought it best to deliver them in person. She studied him with those grey eyes that had always seen too much, that had looked past his defenses even when they were young and he still believed himself inscrutable. A faint smile touched her lips, sad and knowing. Best for whom, Alexander? For your great-aunt's estate or for your conscience? The accusation, gently delivered though it was, struck home. He had no answer that would not sound like exactly what it was, an excuse. So he stood there, rain dripping from his coat, briefcase in hand, while the woman he had once loved and left looked at him as if he were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be welcomed. You'd better come in, she said finally, stepping back to allow him passage. You're letting the heat out, and you look like a drowned rat. An expensive drowned rat, but a drowned rat nonetheless. Gee, he stepped over the threshold, and the warmth of the house enveloped him immediately, along with scents he had forgotten existed, wood smoke and baking bread, and something herbal he could not identify. The interior was much as he remembered, though the furniture had been rearranged and there were new additions, evidence of changes made without his knowledge or consent. Not that he had any right to knowledge or consent, he reminded himself sharply. He had given up that right when he walked away 5 years ago. Take off your coat, Emma instructed, already moving deeper into the house. I'll make coffee. You still drink it black, I assume? 3 sugars? 2 now, he said, shrugging off the wet cashmere and looking for somewhere to hang it. I've cut back. Watching your health in your old age? There was amusement in her voice, and something else, something that might have been affection if he were foolish enough to hope. You're what now, 36? 37 last month. He found a coat rack and hung the garment, noting as he did so a collection of jackets and sweaters that varied wildly in size. Men's clothing mixed with women's, and smaller items that might belong to a child. His chest tightened. Of course she had moved on. Did he expect her to remain frozen in time, a Miss Havisham figure waiting for his return? The thought was absurd, narcissistic, and yet the evidence of her life without him struck him with unexpected force. He followed her into the kitchen, a large room dominated by an ancient stove and a farmhouse table scarred by years of use. Emma moved with easy familiarity, pulling mugs from cabinets, spooning coffee into a French press, her movements economical and assured. She had always been capable, but there was a new confidence in her bearing that spoke of challenges met and overcome, a life lived fully rather than partially. Sit, she said, gesturing to the table. You're making the place look untidy, standing there like a statue. He sat, setting his briefcase carefully on the floor beside his chair. The kitchen window looked out over fields that stretched toward distant tree lines, the landscape softened by rain and approaching dusk. He could see outbuildings in the distance, barns and sheds that appeared in better repair than he would have expected for a small farm operation. "The place looks good," he offered, trying to fill the silence that threatened to become oppressive. "You've kept it up well." "Had to, didn't I?" Emma poured hot water over the coffee grounds, the rich aroma filling the kitchen. "The farm doesn't run itself, and the bills don't pay themselves. Though I suppose you know that now, don't you? About responsibility and keeping things running?" There was no bitterness in her tone, which somehow made it worse. Bitterness he could have defended against, could have matched with his own carefully constructed arguments about duty and opportunity and the sacrifices required for success. But this calm acceptance, this implication that she had expected nothing more from him, cut deeper than any accusation. "I built something," he said, aware of how defensive he sounded. "The company is worth $2 billion now. We employ over 3,000 people across 6 states. That's not nothing, Emma." She pressed the plunger on the French press slowly, deliberately, giving the action more attention than it required. "I never said it was nothing, Alexander. I'm sure it's very impressive. I'm sure your great aunt would have been proud, God rest her soul." She poured coffee into 2 mugs and brought them to the table, sitting across from him with the ease of someone in their own domain. "But you didn't drive 5 hours in a rainstorm to tell me about your company's valuation." "No," he admitted, wrapping his hands around the mug, grateful for something to do with them. "I came to deliver the papers. Aunt Margaret left you something in her will, a substantial something." Emma's eyebrows rose. "Did she? That's unexpected. I hardly knew her. She remembered you from the summers I spent here before." He let the word hang between them, weighted with all the history it contained. "She always liked you, said you were the only person who had ever truly understood me. Your aunt was kind but mistaken." Emma sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of the mug. "I thought I understood you once. I was wrong." The words should have stung, but they carried a matter-of-factness that transcended pain. She was simply stating a fact, the way one might remark on the weather or the price of grain. He had become, in her assessment, unknowable. The realization settled over him like a weight. "The inheritance is considerable," he pressed on, opening his briefcase and withdrawing a leather portfolio. $500,000, along with some property in Massachusetts. There are conditions, of course, legal requirements, but the lawyer can explain those. "I'm just here to play delivery boy?" Emma smiled, and for the first time since he had arrived, there was genuine warmth in the expression. Alexander Ashford, millionaire entrepreneur, featured in Forbes and Fortune, personally delivering legal documents to his ex-girlfriend on her little Vermont farm. "I'm sure that's exactly how you envisioned your Saturday." It's Saturday. He had lost track of the days, a common occurrence in his life of perpetual motion and endless meetings. He thought it was Friday. "It's Saturday. Has been since midnight last night. The calendar still works the same way out here in the provinces." She reached across the table and took the portfolio from his hands, her fingers brushing his briefly, a contact that lasted only a moment but sent electricity coursing through him. "I'll look at these later. Right now, you look exhausted. When did you last eat?" "I had something at a rest stop." He tried to remember what and when, but the details eluded him. "Coffee, I think, maybe a sandwich." "Coffee isn't food, Alexander, any more than ambition is sustenance." Emma stood, moving to the refrigerator with purpose. "I'm making you dinner, don't argue. You've driven a long way, and I won't have it said that Hartwell Farm turned away a visitor hungry." He wanted to protest, to maintain the professional distance he had carefully constructed, to treat this as a business meeting rather than what it was rapidly becoming, a reckoning. But the truth was, he was hungry, not just for food, but for something he could not name, something that had been missing from his life for 5 years. So he simply nodded and watched as Emma began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator, her movements sure and practiced. "I suppose I should ask about your life," he ventured, immediately regretting the awkwardness of the phrasing. What you've been doing, the farm, everything. Emma laughed, a sound like water over stones, clear and bright. 5 years compressed into dinner conversation. That's ambitious even for you. She began chopping vegetables with swift, efficient strikes of a knife that looked well used and perfectly maintained. But I'll give you the abbreviated version. The farm is doing well. Better than well, actually. We've expanded into organic produce, started a CSA program that serves about 60 families, added goats for dairy and cheese production. It's been challenging, but good, fulfilling. The word emerged before he could stop it, sharp with an emotion he did not want to examine too closely. She paused in her chopping, glancing at him with an expression he could not quite read. Did you think I was doing all this alone? A farm this size requires help, Alexander. I have partners now, people who believed in the vision. Partners. The word could mean anything or nothing. He wanted to ask, to demand clarification, but he had no right. He had walked away. He had chosen corporate boardrooms over farmhouse kitchens, stock options over simple companionship. Whatever life Emma had built in his absence was hers alone, and his opinion on the matter was irrelevant. That's good, he managed, the words tasting like ashes. I'm glad you found support. Support. She repeated the word, as if testing its weight. Yes, I suppose that's one way to put it. She returned to her preparations, adding ingredients to a pan on the stove with practiced ease. What about you? I assume you've found support as well. A man in your position must have no shortage of interested parties. Was that jealousy he detected in her tone, or merely idle curiosity? He could not tell, and that uncertainty disoriented him more than he cared to admit. There have been relationships, he said carefully. Nothing serious, nothing that lasted. Nothing that measured up, you mean? Emma stirred the contents of the pan, the sizzle of vegetables in oil filling the momentary silence. Or perhaps nothing that you allowed to last. There's a difference. The accusation was gentler than it should have been, but it struck true nonetheless. How many promising connections had he sabotaged, consciously or otherwise, by comparing them to what he had lost? How many women had walked away, frustrated by his emotional unavailability, his tendency to retreat into work when intimacy threatened? More than he could count if he were being honest. Perhaps, he conceded, watching her move about the kitchen with an ease born of long familiarity. This was her domain, her kingdom, and he was merely a visitor, tolerated but not truly welcomed. The realization should have bothered him more than it did. They fell into a silence that was not quite comfortable, but not entirely hostile either. A neutral zone where old wounds could be acknowledged without being actively reopened. Emma cooked, and Alexander sat at the table, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm, watching the rain continue to fall outside the window. Dusk was deepening into night, and with it came a sense of isolation from the world beyond the farm, as if they existed in a bubble where the normal rules of time and society did not apply. I was sorry to hear about your aunt, Emma said eventually, breaking the quiet. She was a remarkable woman. She was. Alexander felt the familiar ache of grief, still fresh despite the weeks that had passed since Margaret Ashford's death. She went peacefully, at least, in her sleep. The doctor said she simply didn't wake up one morning. A good way to go, if there is such a thing. Emma plated the food, a vegetable stir-fry over rice, simple but aromatic, and brought it to the table along with fresh coffee. She spoke highly of you, the few times I met her, said you reminded her of your grandfather. Everyone says that. He picked up his fork, suddenly ravenous. I'm not sure it's a compliment. My grandfather was by all accounts a difficult man. Brilliant but difficult. And you're not? Emma smiled again, that sad, knowing smile that suggested she saw through his carefully constructed facades. Brilliant and difficult seems to be your brand, Alexander. He wanted to argue, to defend himself against the characterization, but the food demanded his attention. It was delicious, flavored with herbs he could not identify, but that tasted of earth and growth and life. He ate with the focused intensity of a man who has forgotten the pleasure of a home-cooked meal, while Emma watched with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been pity. "You've improved your cooking," he said between bites. "I remember when you could barely make toast without burning it." 5 years is a long time. People learn new skills, adapt to new circumstances. She picked at her own food, eating little, her attention focused more on him than her plate. "You have to when you're on your own." The emphasis on those last words was subtle but unmistakable. On your own, without help, without support, without him. The accusation hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear, and Alexander found he had no defense against it. He had left her to manage alone, had prioritized his ambitions over their relationship, and no amount of success could erase that fundamental betrayal. "Emma, he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. What could he say that would not sound like an excuse or a justification? "I'm sorry" seemed inadequate. "I had to" seemed like a lie. "I've regretted it. Every day was too honest, too revealing of vulnerabilities he had spent years suppressing." "Don't," she said softly, holding up a hand to forestall whatever confession or apology he had been about to make. "Don't say something you don't mean, or something you think I want to hear. We're past that now, Alexander. We're adults. We made our choices, and we've lived with them." But that was the problem, wasn't it? He had not lived with his choice so much as run from it, buried it under layers of work and achievement and carefully curated distractions. Coming here, seeing her again, had ripped away those protective layers, leaving him exposed and uncertain in ways he had not experienced since he was young and foolish, and believed that love could conquer practical considerations. They finished the meal in silence. The only sounds, the scrape of cutlery against plates and the steady drum of rain on the roof. When Emma rose to clear the dishes, Alexander automatically stood to help, years of ingrained courtesy overriding his usual assumption that such tasks were beneath him. She did not protest, and they moved through the simple domestic routine with an ease that felt both strange and familiar, a ghost of what might have been. "You should stay the night," Emma said as she dried the last plate and placed it in the cabinet. "The weather's getting worse, and it's dark now. The roads into town are treacherous even in good conditions." "I couldn't impose," he began, but she cut him off with a look. "It's not an imposition, it's common sense. There's a guest room upstairs, second door on the right. Fresh linens are in the closet. Unless your pride won't allow you to accept hospitality from your ex-girlfriend." Pride. Was that what held him back? Or was it fear? Fear that staying would reveal too much, would strip away the last of his defenses and leave him vulnerable to feelings he had worked so hard to suppress. Either way, she was right about the roads. He had noticed their condition on the drive in, and attempting them in darkness and worsening weather would be foolish at best, dangerous at worst. "Thank you," he said simply. "I appreciate it." Emma nodded, already moving toward the stairs. "I'll get you some towels. The bathroom is across from the guest room. Water takes a minute to heat up, so be patient." She paused at the base of the stairs, looking back at him with an expression he could not decipher. "It's strange having you here, like the past and present colliding." "I know the feeling," he admitted, following her up the narrow stairway. The house creaked and settled around them, old wood responding to changes in temperature and humidity, a living thing shaped by decades of habitation. The walls were lined with photographs he did not remember, images of Emma at various ages and stages, along with other people he did not recognize, family perhaps, or friends, the life she had lived without him, documented and displayed. The guest room was small but clean, furnished simply with a bed, a dresser, and a chair by the window. Emma pulled linens from the closet, sheets that smelled of lavender and sunshine, and began making up the bed with efficient movements that suggested long practice. "I can do that," Alexander protested, but she waved him off. "I'm already doing it. Sit down before you fall down. You look dead on your feet." He obeyed, sinking into the chair and watching her work. There was something hypnotic about her movements, something that called to a part of him that had been dormant for 5 years. Not lust, though he would be lying if he said he did not find her attractive still. No, this was something deeper, more fundamental, a recognition of rightness, of pieces fitting together in a way that transcended physical desire. "There," Emma said, smoothing the final wrinkle from the quilt. "All set, bathroom stocked with everything you should need. If you require anything else, my room is at the end of the hall." "Emma, wait." "Nay," he stood as she turned to leave, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I need you to know, these 5 years, I've thought about—" She turned back, and the expression on her face was infinitely sad and infinitely kind. "Alexander, whatever you've thought about or regretted or wished for, it doesn't change what happened. You made your choice. You chose your company over this, over us. And I'm not saying it was the wrong choice. Maybe it was exactly what you needed to become who you are now, but you can't unmake that choice. And you can't expect me to have waited around for you to decide whether or not you made a mistake." "I know," he said, though the words cost him. "I know I have no right to expect anything. I just wanted you to know that you're sorry, that you miss what we had, that in some parallel universe where you made different choices, we might have been happy." Emma's smile was gentle but firm. "I know all that, Alexander. I've known it from the moment you drove up in your expensive car, with your expensive coat and your briefcase full of legal documents. You didn't come here just to deliver papers. You came here because you needed to see if what we had was still there, if 5 years had erased it or preserved it like some artifact in amber. And," he barely breathed the question, terrified of the answer. "And nothing," she said softly. "It doesn't matter if it's still there or not. We're different people now. I'm different. The girl you left behind doesn't exist anymore, Alexander. She grew up. She had to. With that, she left, closing the door quietly behind her, leaving him alone in the guest room, with nothing but his thoughts and his regrets for company." Alexander stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, before finally moving to the window. The rain had intensified, drops striking the glass like accusations, like the tears he had not allowed himself to shed when he walked away 5 years ago. He'd come here expecting, what? Forgiveness? Absolution? A chance to rewrite history? All of those things seemed foolish now, the fantasies of a man who had convinced himself that money and success could buy back what he had carelessly discarded. Emma had moved on. She had built a life without him, found partners and purpose and contentment in this place he had once dismissed as provincial and limiting. And he had what? A company worth billions and an apartment that felt like a mausoleum, filled with expensive things but empty of anything that truly mattered. The self-pity threatened to overwhelm him, but he pushed it back through sheer force of will. This was not about him and his feelings. This was about Emma and what she deserved, which was certainly not a man who appeared out of nowhere after 5 years expecting to be welcomed with open arms. She had been gracious to feed him and offer him shelter, more gracious than he had any right to expect. Tomorrow he would give her the documents, explain the legal requirements, and then he would leave. That was what he should do, what he must do. But even as he formed that resolution, he knew it would not be so simple, because coming here had awakened something in him that he had thought successfully suppressed, a longing for connection, for authenticity, for a life that meant something beyond quarterly earnings reports and stock prices. Emma had found that here on her farm, in her simple kitchen, with her partners and her goats and her CSA program, she had found what he had spent 5 years searching for in all the wrong places. Alexander undressed mechanically, hanging his suit carefully, despite knowing it was probably ruined by the rain and the mud. He found the bathroom, showered in water that indeed took several minutes to heat up, and returned to the guest room wearing nothing but his boxer shorts, his usual pajamas, forgotten in his overnight bag, which he had left in the car. The sheets were cool and crisp against his skin, the mattress firm but comfortable, and he lay there listening to the sounds of the house settling, of Emma moving about in her room at the end of the hall, of the rain that showed no signs of stopping. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of roads not taken and choices unmade, of a version of himself that had stayed and built something different, something that could not be measured in dollars or market share, but was valuable nonetheless. He woke several times during the night, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, by the absence of city noise and the presence of Emma somewhere in the same house, so close and yet impossibly far away. Each time he forced himself back to sleep, determined not to be found, wandering the halls like some lovesick ghost. Morning arrived grey and sullen, the rain having finally stopped but leaving behind a world soaked and dripping. Alexander woke to unfamiliar sounds, chickens perhaps, or the lowing of cattle in distant fields. For a moment he forgot where he was, reaching for his phone on a nightstand that was not his own, in a room that bore no resemblance to his Manhattan bedroom. Then memory returned, bringing with it a mixture of embarrassment and something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. He dressed in yesterday's clothes, rumpled and slightly damp, and made his way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and something baking. The kitchen was empty, but evidence of Emma's presence was everywhere. A mug in the sink, the coffee pot still warm, a note propped against the sugar bowl in handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. Gone to deal with the morning feeding. Help yourself to breakfast. Muffins in the oven should be done in 10 minutes. The ease of her hospitality, the assumption that he could navigate her kitchen and her life without supervision, touched something in him that he had thought calcified beyond reach. He poured coffee and stood at the window, watching the grey morning reveal the full scope of the farm. It was larger than he had realized in last night's darkness and rain, fields stretching in multiple directions, outbuildings that appeared purpose-built rather than haphazardly assembled. This was not a hobby farm or a romantic retreat from modernity, but a working operation, a business in its own right. The realization adjusted something in his perception of Emma, adding layers to his understanding of what she had accomplished in his absence. Movement caught his eye. Emma emerging from one of the barns, accompanied by another figure. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes and moving with the easy confidence of someone on familiar ground. They stood close together, Emma gesturing toward one of the fields while the man nodded, his hand coming to rest casually on her shoulder, in a gesture that spoke of intimacy and long familiarity. Alexander's chest tightened with an emotion he had no right to feel but could not suppress. Jealousy, raw and irrational, flooded through him like poison. The timer on the oven interrupted his dark thoughts, and he forced himself to move, to pull the muffins from the heat and set them on the cooling rack Emma had left out. They were beautiful, golden and fragrant, evidence of a skill she had clearly developed over years of practice. He took one, burning his fingers in his impatience, and bit into it before it had properly cooled. Blueberry, the berries bursting with sweetness against the tender crumb. It was perfect, like everything else she seemed to touch now, transformed by her attention and care. The back door opened, admitting Emma along with a gust of cold air and the scent of animals and earth. She was alone now, the man from the barn apparently having gone elsewhere, and she looked surprised to find Alexander in the kitchen, as if she had forgotten his presence overnight. "You're up early," she observed, moving to the sink to wash her hands with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to dealing with livestock. City people usually sleep later when they're in the country. Something about the quiet being unsettling. "I've never been much for sleeping in," he replied, lifting his coffee mug in a sort of salute. "The muffins are excellent, thank you." "They're just muffins, Alexander, not a culinary masterpiece." But he could see she was pleased by the compliment, a faint color rising in her cheeks that made her look younger, more like the girl he had known. "I need to show you around the property. Part of the inheritance involves some land that borders my farm, and you should see it before you sign anything. Your aunt was very specific about wanting you to understand what you were agreeing to." "I trust your assessment," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No, That's not how this works. You don't get to trust me to handle things while you remain ignorant of the details. That's what got you into trouble last time. Assuming that good intentions were enough, that you could delegate the hard parts and still claim credit for the relationship. She grabbed her own coffee, leaning against the counter with the air of someone preparing to deliver an uncomfortable truth. If you're going to be involved in this, even tangentially, you need to understand what it entails. Otherwise, don't waste my time or yours. The rebuke stung precisely because it was accurate. He had always been guilty of that particular sin, delegating emotional labor, assuming that his presence alone was sufficient contribution to any partnership. It had destroyed their relationship, had damaged others since, and hearing it stated so boldly forced him to confront a pattern he had spent years refusing to acknowledge. "You're right," he said simply. "Show me everything. I want to understand." Something flickered in Emma's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or approval. "All right then, finish your coffee and put on your boots." "Wait, you didn't bring boots, did you? You came here in Italian leather shoes and a cashmere coat like you were attending a board meeting." "I wasn't planning to tour a farm," he protested, but even to his own ears the excuse sounded weak. "You never planned for the real world, Alexander. That's always been your problem." She opened a closet near the back door and pulled out a pair of rubber boots, worn but clean. "These were your size once. Might still be. Try them." He took the boots, recognizing them with a start. They had been his from the summers he spent here before everything went wrong, before ambition and pride had convinced him that this life was too small for his aspirations. That Emma had kept them, had not thrown them away or donated them in the intervening years, meant something, though he dared not examine too closely what that something might be. The boots still fit, snug but wearable, and he followed Emma out into the morning, grateful for the clouds that obscured what would have been a brilliant sunrise. The farm was coming alive around them, other workers appearing from various buildings, calling greetings to Emma that she returned with easy familiarity. They all looked at Alexander with varying degrees of curiosity, but no one questioned his presence, deferring to Emma's lead in a way that clearly established the hierarchy here. This was her domain, and he was merely a visitor, tolerated at her sufferance. They walked in silence at first, Emma leading him along paths between fields that showed signs of recent harvest, the earth turned and ready for winter's rest. She pointed out various features as they went: the irrigation system she had installed 3 years ago, the greenhouse complex that allowed for year-round production, the composting facility that recycled all the farm's organic waste. Each innovation represented significant investment and planning, evidence of a mind that was anything but provincial or limited. "The land your aunt is leaving to you is there," Emma said, pointing toward a section of forest that bordered her fields to the east. "About 40 acres, mostly wooded. There's a stream running through it that feeds into the reservoir we use for irrigation. That's where the complications come in." "What kind of complications?" Alexander studied the tree line, trying to understand what he was looking at, what hidden issues might lurk beneath the seemingly straightforward bequest. "Water rights primarily. The stream is the farm's main water source during dry seasons. Your aunt had an agreement with my grandfather that gave us unlimited access in exchange for maintaining the forest roads and preventing erosion. That agreement dies with her unless you choose to renew it." Emma's tone was carefully neutral, but he could sense the tension beneath her words. Without that water, particularly in drought years, the farm's viability is questionable. Understanding dawned, cold and uncomfortable. "She left you the money to buy the land from me." "That's my assumption, yes. She was always clever about such things, your aunt, ensuring continuity while giving everyone the illusion of choice." Emma resumed walking, following a path that led toward the forest in question. "But I wanted you to see it first, to understand what you'd be selling. It's not just about the money or the water rights. It's about legacy and stewardship and understanding that some things have value beyond their market price." They reached the forest's edge, where a well-maintained trail led into the trees. Emma entered without hesitation, and Alexander followed, immediately struck by the change in atmosphere. The woods were old growth, thick with trees that had stood for decades, if not centuries, their canopy filtering the grey light into something almost sacred. The stream she had mentioned ran clear and cold over smooth stones, its voice a constant murmur beneath the whisper of wind through branches. "It's beautiful," he said, inadequate though the words were for what he was experiencing. He had forgotten this, had let himself forget the existence of places that demanded nothing from him but attention, that offered nothing but their own existence as justification for preservation. "It is," Emma agreed, stopping beside the stream and crouching to trail her fingers in the water. "Your aunt used to bring you here when you were young, before you got too important for simple pleasures. She told me once that you used to spend hours here just sitting and thinking. She wondered what happened to that boy, where he went." "He grew up," Alexander said, the words emerging more harshly than intended. "He learned that sitting beside streams doesn't pay bills or build companies or prove anything to anyone." "And has proving things made you happy?" Emma stood, facing him with an expression that was neither judgmental nor sympathetic, simply curious, as if his answer genuinely interested her. "Has it filled whatever hole you were trying to fill when you walked away?" The question struck at the heart of everything he had been avoiding for 5 years, every doubt he had suppressed in service of forward momentum and relentless achievement. Had it made him happy? Could he even remember what happiness felt like, untainted by the anxiety of maintaining success, the fear of losing what he had gained? When was the last time he had experienced pure contentment, the simple satisfaction of being rather than becoming? "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty costing him something essential, some piece of the armor he had constructed around himself. "I thought it would. I believed that if I could just achieve enough, prove myself sufficiently, that everything else would fall into place. But it hasn't. It just keeps moving. The finish line, always just beyond reach." Emma nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. "That's the thing about external validation, Alexander. It's never enough because it's not what you're actually hungry for. You're trying to fill an internal void with external achievements, and it doesn't work that way. It can't work that way. And you figured this out?" He heard the defensiveness in his tone, the reflexive need to deflect uncomfortable truths. "You've achieved enlightenment here on your farm, have you? Found all the answers I'm too blind to see?" "I've figured out that happiness isn't something you pursue, it's something you practice," Emma replied, unperturbed by his sarcasm. "I've learned to find satisfaction in work well done, in relationships that matter, in being part of something larger than myself. Is it perfect? No. Are there days I struggle? Absolutely. But I'm not constantly chasing some imaginary future where everything will finally be enough. I'm here now, doing work that matters to me. That's more than you can say." The accuracy of her assessment left him momentarily speechless. She was right, of course. He was never present, never satisfied, always focused on the next deal, the next acquisition, the next proof of his worth. Even now, standing in this forest beside this stream with this woman who had once been the center of his world, part of his mind was calculating, planning, worrying about what awaited him back in New York. "How do you do it?" he asked quietly. "How do you just be?" "Practice," Emma said simply. "And letting go of the belief that your worth is determined by your accomplishments. You are not your company, Alexander. You are not your bank account or your reputation or your position in some hierarchy. You're a person with inherent value that exists independent of what you do or don't achieve. Until you understand that, truly understand it, you'll never be satisfied." They stood in silence for a long moment, the stream continuing its endless journey, indifferent to human struggles and revelations. Alexander felt something shifting inside him, some long-held certainty loosening its grip, and the sensation was both terrifying and oddly liberating. What if she was right? What if everything he had been chasing was simply a distraction from the real work of becoming a complete human being? "I should probably confess something," Emma said, breaking the contemplative quiet. I'm not planning to buy the land. The water rights are important, yes, but there are other solutions. Wells, rainwater collection, conservation methods. I wanted you to see this place because your aunt wanted you to see it. She thought it might remind you of who you used to be before you became so focused on who you thought you should become. Another of her manipulations, Alexander said, but there was no heat in the words. His aunt had always been given to such schemes, orchestrating encounters and circumstances with the confidence of someone who believed she knew what was best for everyone. Usually, she had been right. She loved you, Emma said simply, and she worried about you. The last time I spoke with her, about 6 months before she died, she said you seemed hollowed out, like you were running on momentum rather than genuine desire. She wanted to give you a reason to stop, to reassess, to maybe remember that there are other ways to live. By leaving me this land and forcing me to confront my ex-girlfriend, he managed a weak smile. That's certainly an approach. By giving you an excuse to come back here, to see what you gave up, to decide if it was worth it. Emma turned away from the stream, starting back toward the farm. What you do with that opportunity is entirely up to you. But know this, Alexander, I don't need your land, and I don't need your money. I've built something here that's mine, that's stable and sustainable and meaningful. You're welcome to be part of that if you choose, but only if you're genuinely choosing it, not just running from something else. He followed her through the forest, his mind churning with implications and possibilities. The trail seemed shorter on the return journey, or perhaps he was simply more aware of the limited time he had to make decisions that would affect not just his immediate future, but the entire trajectory of his life. They emerged from the trees to find the farm bustling with activity, people moving with purpose between buildings, the organized chaos of a working operation. The man Alexander had seen earlier appeared again, this time approaching them directly with an easy stride that suggested comfort and belonging. He was younger than Alexander had initially thought, perhaps 30, with the kind of rugged attractiveness that came from outdoor work and physical health rather than gym memberships and personal trainers. We've got a situation with the goats, the man said, his attention focused entirely on Emma. Looks like one of the does is going into labor early. Tom's with her now, but he wanted your opinion on whether to call the vet. I'll come look, Emma replied, then seemed to remember Alexander's presence. Alexander, this is James Whitmore. He's my partner in the farming operation. James, this is Alexander Ashford. We knew each other years ago. Partner, the word hung between them, loaded with meanings both professional and personal. James extended his hand, and Alexander shook it, noting the calluses, the strength in the grip, the confidence of a man secure in his place. This was Emma's life now, her chosen companion, and Alexander had no claim on her attention or affection that could compete with that reality. Nice to meet you, James said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. He had clearly been told about Alexander, had probably heard the whole sordid story of the man who had left Emma to pursue his ambitions. I've heard a lot about you. Nothing good, I imagine, Alexander replied, striving for lightness and achieving only awkwardness. Actually, Em doesn't talk about you much at all. James's smile was polite but cool, which tells me everything I need to know. Emma intervened before the tension could escalate. James, show Alexander back to the house, would you? I need to check on Daisy, and then I have that conference call with the CSA coordinator. Alexander and I can continue our discussion this afternoon. It was a dismissal, gentle but firm, and Alexander had no choice but to accept it. He followed James back toward the main house, the silence between them thick with unspoken judgments and assessments. James moved with the ease of someone who knew every inch of the property, who belonged here in a way Alexander never had and probably never would. How long have you been working with Emma? Alexander asked, more to break the silence than from genuine curiosity. 3 years, James replied. Started as a seasonal worker, stayed on full-time when she expanded the operation. She's built something remarkable here. You should be proud of her. The implication was clear: proud from a distance, as an observer rather than a participant. "I am," Alexander said, though the words felt hollow. Pride was too simple an emotion for what he felt when confronted with Emma's accomplishments, a mixture of admiration and regret, and something darker, something that tasted of envy. They reached the house, and James excused himself with perfunctory politeness, leaving Alexander alone on the porch like a stranger, rather than someone who had once been intimate with every corner of this place. He went inside, retrieved his briefcase, and spread the legal documents across the kitchen table, trying to lose himself in the familiar comfort of contracts and clauses. But the words swam before his eyes, meaningless, and he found himself instead staring out the window toward the barn where Emma had disappeared, wondering about her life, her choices, her relationship with the capable James Whitmore. The morning stretched into afternoon, marked by the gradual lightening of the clouds and the appearance of weak sunlight that did little to warm the November air. Alexander made himself useful in small ways, washing dishes, tidying the kitchen, feeding the wood stove when it burned low. Domestic tasks that his housekeeper usually handled that he had not performed himself in years. And there was something meditative about them, a focusing of attention on simple, immediate needs rather than abstract future concerns. Emma returned eventually, looking tired but satisfied. "Daisy's fine. False alarm, just Braxton Hicks contractions. But better to check than to lose a kid." She noticed his efforts at housekeeping and smiled. "You've been busy. Thank you." "It's nothing," he said, then corrected himself. "Actually, no, it's not nothing. It's something I should have been doing all along, being useful rather than just decorative." "That's unexpectedly self-aware of you." Emma poured herself coffee from the pot he had made, sipping it without comment on its quality or lack thereof. "The conference call went well. We're adding 10 more families to the CSA next season. It's becoming a real challenge to keep up with demand. Have you considered expanding further? Additional land? More staff?" The business consultant in him emerged automatically, analyzing, strategizing. "With the right investment, you could scale this operation significantly." "I could," Emma agreed. "But that's not the point. The point isn't maximum profit or unlimited growth. It's sustainable production, community connection, quality over quantity. Not everything has to scale, Alexander. Sometimes small and excellent is better than large and mediocre." It was a rebuke, however gently delivered, a reminder that his worldview was not universally applicable or desirable. He had spent so long in environments where growth was synonymous with success that he had forgotten other metrics existed, other ways of measuring value and achievement. "I apologize," he said. "Force of habit. I see a successful operation, and I immediately start thinking about optimization and expansion. But you're right. What you've built here is valuable precisely because it's personal and manageable and connected to community rather than shareholders." "Exactly." Emma sat across from him at the table, pushing his documents aside to make room for her coffee mug. "So, the inheritance. Have you made any decisions?" "I want to sign over the land to you," he said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. "No payment, no strings attached. It's what my aunt wanted, clearly, and it's what makes sense. You need the water rights, and I have no use for 40 acres of forest 300 miles from where I live." Emma studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "That's generous. Too generous, actually. The land is worth at least $400,000. I can't accept that as a gift." "You can, and you will," Alexander insisted. "Consider it restitution. Repayment for what I took from you 5 years ago when I left. You can't buy absolution, Alexander, and I'm not selling forgiveness." Her voice was firm but not unkind. "If you want to sign over the land, fine, but don't frame it as some kind of grand gesture that erases the past. The past is what it is. This is a separate transaction, a practical solution to a water rights issue." He felt the sting of her refusal to allow him even the comfort of meaningful sacrifice. She would not let him be noble, would not permit him the satisfaction of grand gestures that might salve his conscience. Instead, she insisted on reducing everything to practicality, stripping away the emotional weight he wanted to assign to the act. "Fine," he said, hearing the petulance in his tone and hating it. "It's a practical transaction. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers." "Good." Emma stood, moving to the refrigerator and beginning to pull out ingredients for what he assumed would be dinner. "Now, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Why did you really come here? Not the official reason, not the inheritance excuse, the real reason." He could have dissembled, could have retreated behind professional courtesy and plausible explanations, but something about this place, this woman, demanded honesty, however uncomfortable. "I needed to see you," he admitted. "I needed to know if I had been wrong, if the choice I made 5 years ago was a mistake." And Emma did not turn from her meal preparations, but he could sense her attention focused entirely on him, waiting for his answer. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I gave up something irreplaceable in pursuit of something that turned out to be hollow. But that doesn't mean I can undo it, or that you should forgive me, or that there's any path forward from here. It just means I was wrong." Emma did turn then, looking at him with an expression that held both sadness and something that might have been affection. "Thank you for that, for being honest. It doesn't change anything, but it matters that you can admit it. Does it?" He stood, restless with emotions he did not know how to process. "Does my admission of failure matter when it comes 5 years too late to make a difference?" "It matters to you," Emma replied. "It matters because it means you're capable of growth, of self-reflection, of becoming something other than what you've been. That's not nothing, Alexander. That's actually everything." They prepared dinner together, falling into an easy rhythm that felt both familiar and strange, as if they were reenacting scenes from a life that had never actually existed, a parallel universe where he had made different choices and they had built something together. The meal was simple: pasta with vegetables from the farm, bread that Emma had baked herself, a salad of late-season greens. But it tasted better than anything from the Michelin-starred restaurants he frequented in Manhattan, flavored as it was with presence and attention, rather than mere technical skill. James joined them for dinner, appearing with the easy casualness of someone who belonged, who did not need invitation or permission. His presence altered the dynamic, making Alexander acutely aware of his status as outsider, observer rather than participant. James and Emma communicated with the kind of shorthand that came from working closely together, from shared experiences and mutual understanding. They discussed farm business, CSA logistics, plans for the spring planting, and Alexander listened, contributing nothing, feeling increasingly like a ghost at the feast. After dinner, James excused himself, citing an early morning and the need for sleep. He squeezed Emma's shoulder as he left, a gesture of casual intimacy that made Alexander's chest tighten with jealousy he had no right to feel. When they were alone again, the silence felt heavy, weighted with all the things that remained unsaid. "He's in love with you," Alexander said abruptly, unable to contain the observation any longer. Emma looked at him, surprised. "James, no. We're friends, partners in the business sense, nothing more. He wants there to be more." Alexander stood, moving to the window, unable to remain still. "I saw how he looks at you. He's hoping, waiting for you to see him as something other than a colleague. And if he is," Emma's voice held a challenge, "what business is it of yours? You gave up any claim on my romantic life when you walked away. Who I may or may not have feelings for is not your concern." "You're right," he conceded, turning to face her. "You're absolutely right. But that doesn't mean I can simply stop caring, stop wanting you to be happy, even if that happiness is with someone else." Emma sighed, rubbing her temples as if warding off a headache. "This is exhausting, Alexander. This constant dance around what we once were and can never be again. You need to let go. You need to accept that this," she gestured between them, "is over and has been for 5 years. Holding on to it, romanticizing it, imagining that there's still something salvageable here. It's not fair to either of us." "I know," he said quietly. I know all of that intellectually, but knowing and accepting are different things. Then work on the accepting part, Emma said firmly, because I have. I've accepted that we wanted different things, that you needed to prove something to yourself that you couldn't prove here. I've accepted that what we had, while real and meaningful at the time, wasn't strong enough to withstand the pull of your ambitions, and I've moved on. You should do the same. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. This was not an opening for negotiation or a softening that might lead to reconciliation. This was a door closing firmly and permanently, and he had no choice but to accept it with whatever grace he could muster. Alexander slept poorly that night, his rest fractured by dreams that dissolved upon waking, leaving only a residue of unease and longing. He rose before dawn, unable to bear the confinement of the guest room any longer, and dressed in yesterday's clothes for the second day running. The house was silent around him, the darkness outside absolute, in a way that never happened in the city, where light pollution rendered true night impossible. He made his way downstairs by feel more than sight, navigating the creaking steps with the care of an intruder. The kitchen was cold, the wood stove having burned down to embers during the night. He set about rekindling it, a skill he had not exercised in years, but that returned with surprising ease. There was something satisfying about the process, the careful arrangement of kindling, the coaxing of flame from spark, the gradual building of heat. It was immediate and real in a way that his work never was, dealing as it did with abstractions and projections rather than tangible cause and effect. Coffee made and mug in hand, he stood at the kitchen window watching dawn break over the farm. The sky lightened by degrees, grey yielding to pink and gold, revealing the landscape in layers. He saw Emma emerge from the barn, her breath visible in the cold air, followed by James and another worker he did not recognize. They moved with purpose, dividing tasks with the efficiency of long practice, and he felt a pang of envy for their easy collaboration, their shared mission. The back door opened, admitting Emma along with a blast of frigid air. She looked surprised to find him awake and dressed, the kitchen warm and coffee ready. "You've been busy," she observed, shrugging off her coat and moving to the stove to warm her hands. "I didn't think city people knew how to light fires anymore." "Isn't that what thermostats are for?" "I used to know a lot of things," he replied, pouring her coffee without asking if she wanted it. 3 sugars, the way she had always taken it, and he felt absurdly pleased when she accepted it without comment. "I've spent the last 5 years forgetting them in favor of more profitable knowledge." "And now you're remembering?" She studied him over the rim of her mug, her expression unreadable in the early morning light. "Or is this just nostalgia, a temporary return to simpler times before you go back to your real life?" It was a fair question, and one he had been asking himself throughout the sleepless night. What was he doing here? What did he hope to accomplish with this prolonged visit that had already exceeded any reasonable business justification? The land transfer could have been handled remotely, the documents signed and notarized without his physical presence. Yet he remained, drawn by forces he did not fully understand, or perhaps simply refused to acknowledge. "I don't know," he admitted, setting down his mug with more force than necessary. "I don't know what I'm doing, or why I'm still here, or what I'm hoping to find. I only know that going back to New York, to my apartment and my office and my carefully scheduled life, feels impossible right now, like I'd be sleepwalking back into a prison of my own construction." Emma was silent for a long moment, considering his words with the seriousness they deserved. "That's honest, at least. But Alexander, you can't stay here indefinitely trying to figure out your life. This is my home, my workplace, and while I don't begrudge you a few days of sanctuary, I can't be your therapist or your salvation. You need to do that work yourself." "I know," he said, though the knowledge brought no comfort. "I'll leave today. I'll drive back to the city, sign whatever papers need signing, and trouble you no further. Is that what you want?" The question was asked softly, without judgment or expectation, simply seeking information. "To leave, to return to what you know? Because if it is, then go. But if you're running again, fleeing from discomfort toward familiar numbness, Then maybe you should stay. Maybe you should sit with the discomfort until you understand what it's trying to tell you. He turned to face her fully, struck by the change in her tone. This was not the Emma who had been pushing him away, maintaining careful distance. This was something else, something that resembled genuine concern. Why would you want me to stay? I've brought nothing but disruption and uncomfortable memories. Because despite everything, despite the pain you caused and the years of silence, I don't want to see you destroy yourself, Emma replied simply. And that's what you're doing, Alexander. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself, like you're barely keeping everything together. You're burning out, consuming yourself in pursuit of goals that don't actually matter to you. And while I'm not responsible for saving you from yourself, I'm not cruel enough to send you back to that without at least offering an alternative. What alternative? He heard the desperation in his voice and did not care. What could I possibly do here? I'm not a farmer, Emma. I don't know the first thing about raising goats or growing vegetables or any of this. He gestured vaguely toward the window, encompassing the entire operation. You could learn, she said, if you wanted to. If you were willing to set aside your ego and your expertise and start over as a beginner. We could use another pair of hands, especially with the spring planting coming up. It wouldn't be glamorous, and it certainly wouldn't pay what you're used to, but it would be real, tangible, connected to something beyond quarterly returns and shareholder value. The offer hung between them, impossible and tempting in equal measure. Walk away from everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed for, to become a laborer on a Vermont farm? The idea was absurd, the kind of dramatic gesture that belonged in romance novels rather than real life. His board would think he had lost his mind. His competitors would circle like sharks scenting blood. His entire carefully constructed identity would collapse. And yet the thought of waking each morning with purpose beyond profit, of using his hands for something other than typing emails and signing contracts, of being part of Emma's world rather than forever excluded from it, these possibilities called to something deep within him, some part of himself that he had buried so thoroughly he had almost forgotten its existence. I couldn't, he began, then stopped, honesty demanding acknowledgement of the truth. I'm afraid of failing at something so far outside my expertise, afraid of looking foolish, afraid of... He broke off, unable to articulate the deepest fear, that he would try and still find no satisfaction, that the emptiness would persist regardless of circumstance or occupation. Afraid you'll discover that changing your external circumstances won't fix what's broken inside, Emma finished for him, her insight as sharp and unwelcome as ever. That's a valid fear, Alexander, but the only way to know is to try, to commit to something fully, without reservations or exit strategies, and see what happens. Is that what you're doing? He turned the question back on her, suddenly curious. Living here, running this farm, is this you following your passion, or is this you hiding from something else? A shadow crossed Emma's face, something that might have been pain or might have been recognition. Maybe both, she admitted. Maybe I came here after you left because I needed to prove something to myself, needed to create something that was entirely mine, untainted by anyone else's expectations or judgments. Maybe I've been hiding from the possibility of another relationship, another chance at love, because the first attempt hurt so badly. The confession was unexpected, a crack in the armor of competence and self-sufficiency she had projected since his arrival. It made her more human, more vulnerable, and paradoxically more attractive for those very qualities. James, Alexander said quietly. You've been hiding from James. Perhaps, Emma acknowledged. He's kind and capable and genuinely interested in building something together, but I can't seem to let myself trust it, can't allow myself to believe that it could work when the last time I tried ended so badly. That's my fault, Alexander said, the words tasting of ash. I damaged you in ways I didn't fully understand until now. You're not that powerful, Emma replied, but there was a faint smile on her lips that took the sting from the words. I've spent 5 years healing, growing, becoming someone stronger and more self-sufficient. You were a catalyst, not a cause. I had my own issues, my own fears and insecurities that I've had to work through. You just happened to trigger them spectacularly. They stood in the warming kitchen as the sun rose fully, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Outside, the farm continued its morning routine, indifferent to human dramas and revelations. Alexander felt something shifting inside himself, some tectonic movement of long-held beliefs and assumptions. What if he could start over? What if he could become someone other than the person he had spent years constructing, layer by careful layer? If I stayed, he said slowly, testing the words, it would have to be genuine, not a vacation or a sabbatical or some kind of spiritual tourism. I'd have to commit fully, do the actual work, not just play at being a farmer while maintaining my real life as a safety net. Yes, Emma agreed. Anything less would be insulting to everyone here who's chosen this life deliberately, not as an escape, but as a calling. I'd have to sell the company, Alexander continued, working through the implications, or at least my majority stake. Step down from the board. Extricate myself from all the obligations and commitments that fill my calendar for the next 18 months. That sounds complicated, Emma observed neutrally, neither encouraging nor discouraging. It would be catastrophic, he said bluntly. Stock price would probably tank, at least initially. Competitors would move in, try to poach key clients and personnel. Everything I've spent 5 years building would be at risk. Then perhaps you should stay in New York, Emma suggested. Honor your commitments, see through what you've started. Coming here was an impulse, Alexander, born of exhaustion and disillusionment. Impulses pass. You might wake up tomorrow or next week or next month and regret everything, resent me for not talking you out of this madness. She was giving him an exit, a graceful way to back away from declarations made in moments of emotional vulnerability. It was kind of her, practical and considerate. And it made him perversely determined to prove that this was more than impulse, that he was capable of sustained commitment to something other than profit margins and market dominance. No, he said firmly, I'm staying, at least for a while, long enough to know if this is real or just another form of running away. I'll call my attorney tomorrow, start the process of disentangling myself from the company. It will take time, probably months, but I can begin. Emma searched his face, looking for certainty, or perhaps for cracks in his resolve. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. All right, but understand this. If you stay, you work. Real work, not symbolic gestures. You start at the bottom, doing whatever needs doing, and you take direction from people who know far more than you about this life. Your business expertise means nothing here. Your wealth means nothing here. You're just another pair of hands, and not a particularly skilled pair at that. I understand, Alexander said, and meant it. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, the free fall of releasing control and accepting genuine uncertainty. When do I start? Now, Emma replied, finishing her coffee and setting the mug in the sink. Get changed into work clothes. You'll find some in the closet that should fit. Meet me in the East Barn in 15 minutes. We're mucking out stalls today, and it's exactly as glamorous as it sounds. She left him, standing in the kitchen, his heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and dread. This was madness. This was potentially the worst decision he had ever made, throwing away everything he had worked for on the basis of feelings and half-formed hopes. And yet it felt more right than anything he had done in years, more aligned with some essential truth about himself that he had been denying for far too long. He changed quickly, finding clothes in the closet that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, work pants and flannel shirts that had clearly belonged to someone else once upon a time. They fit reasonably well, and when he looked at himself in the small mirror above the dresser, he barely recognized the man staring back. Without his tailored suits and expensive accessories, stripped of the external markers of success and status, he looked younger, more uncertain, more human. The walk to the east barn took him through mud and morning dew, soaking his borrowed boots and spattering his pants. He could hear voices inside the barn as he approached, Emma's clear and directing, others responding with the easy banter of co-workers who genuinely liked each other. He paused at the door, suddenly gripped by anxiety about how he would be received, whether they would accept him or merely tolerate him out of deference to Emma. He stepped inside, and conversation stopped. 5 people turned to look at him. Emma, James, and 3 others he had not yet met. They assessed him with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity, clearly wondering what possible use a Manhattan millionaire could be in their working operation. "Everyone, this is Alexander," Emma said, her tone deliberately casual. "He's going to be helping out around the farm for a while. Alexander, this is Maria, Tom, and Sarah. You've already met James. They're going to show you what needs doing, and I expect you to follow their instructions without argument or ego. Clear?" "Clear," Alexander replied, aware that he was being tested, that his response to this moment would set the tone for everything that followed. "Good," Emma said briskly. "James, get him started on the stalls. Show him proper technique so he doesn't hurt himself or the animals. Maria, you're with me on the greenhouse. Tom, Sarah, take care of feeding, and then meet us for the irrigation system check." The group dispersed with practiced efficiency, leaving Alexander alone with James, who regarded him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and wariness. "So," James said after a moment of awkward silence, "you're really doing this? Slumming it with us rural folks?" "I'm not slumming," Alexander protested, then checked himself, recognizing the defensiveness. "I'm learning, or trying to. I know I don't belong here yet, but I'd like to earn that belonging if possible." James studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, some internal judgment apparently passed. "All right then. First rule of farm work. Livestock don't care about your schedule or your comfort. They need what they need when they need it, and your job is to provide it. Second rule, ask questions before you do something, not after you've already done it wrong. Third rule, we look out for each other here. Everyone pulls their weight, and everyone has each other's backs. If you can't commit to that, then save us all the trouble and leave now." "I can commit to that," Alexander said, meaning it with a fervor that surprised him. "We'll see," James replied, not unkindly. "Come on, I'll show you how to muck a stall properly. It's a skill you'll be using a lot in the coming weeks." The work was exactly as unglamorous as Emma had promised. Mucking stalls meant shoveling manure and soiled bedding into a wheelbarrow, transporting it to the compost pile and returning for another load, again and again, until all 12 stalls had been cleaned and fresh bedding laid down. Alexander's back began to ache within the first hour, his hands blistering despite the gloves James had provided. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cold air, and his legs trembled with fatigue from the constant bending and lifting. James worked alongside him, maintaining a steady pace that made Alexander's efforts look clumsy and inefficient by comparison. He offered corrections without condescension, showing Alexander how to position his body to avoid strain, how to read the animals' moods and respect their space, how to move through the work with economy rather than brute force. It was a masterclass in physical labor, and Alexander found himself humbled by how much skill was required for tasks he had always dismissed as simple. They broke for lunch, gathering in the farmhouse kitchen where Maria had prepared a simple meal of soup and bread. Alexander sat at the table with the others, acutely aware of his outsider status, of the way conversation flowed around him rather than including him. They discussed farm business, personal matters, shared jokes whose context he lacked. He ate in silence, too exhausted to attempt social integration, focused simply on replenishing calories for the afternoon's work. Emma appeared briefly, assessed him with a quick glance that seemed to catalogue his fatigue and determination in equal measure, then disappeared again to handle some crisis with the irrigation system. Her absence was both relief and disappointment. Relief because her presence made him self-conscious, disappointed because he wanted to prove to her that he could do this, that his commitment was genuine. The afternoon brought new challenges. James took him to the greenhouse, where precise work replaced physical labor. They planted seedlings, mixed soil amendments, adjusted temperature and humidity controls. Here, Alexander's natural precision and attention to detail proved more useful, and he felt a small surge of satisfaction when James nodded approval at his careful placement of delicate plants. "You've got decent hands for this kind of work," James observed. "Once you build up some calluses and stop being afraid of getting dirty, you might actually be useful." It was faint praise, but Alexander felt absurdly pleased by it, starved as he was for any acknowledgement that he belonged, that he could contribute meaningfully to this enterprise. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the greenhouse warm and humid, smelling of earth and growth. It was pleasant in a way that surprised him, meditative almost, the simple act of helping things grow. "Why are you really here?" James asked eventually, his tone more curious than confrontational. "Emma says you're taking a break from your company, but that's not the whole story, is it?" Alexander considered how to answer. How much truth to offer this man who loved Emma and had every reason to resent his presence. "I'm here because I realized I was living the wrong life," he said finally, "building the wrong things, measuring success by the wrong metrics. I came back intending just to handle some legal business and leave. But being here, seeing what Emma has created, what all of you have created together, it showed me what I've been missing. Purpose, community, work that matters beyond making money." "That's pretty words," James said neutrally. "But Emma said you left her 5 years ago for that wrong life you're supposedly rejecting now. What's changed? What makes you think you won't wake up 6 months from now, decide this was all a mistake, and disappear back to your penthouse?" "I don't know that I won't," Alexander admitted. "I can't make promises about the future when I barely understand my own present. All I know is that right now, in this moment, I need to try. I need to see if there's a version of myself that can be satisfied with this kind of life, this kind of work. If I don't try, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." James nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Fair enough, but understand something. Emma's happy here. She's built something good, surrounded herself with people who care about her, created a life that works. Don't mess that up just because you're having a midlife crisis and need to find yourself or whatever. If you're going to be here for the right reasons, not just because you're running from something else." "I hear you," Alexander said, "and for what it's worth, I see how you look at her. You'd be good for her, James, better than I ever was." "That's not for you to say," James replied, but there was less hostility in his tone now, as if Alexander's acknowledgement of his own inadequacy had somehow humanized him. "Emma makes her own choices, always has. My feelings are my problem, not yours." They returned to work, the conversation apparently concluded. But something had shifted between them, some tension eased by honesty and mutual respect. Alexander would not call them friends exactly, but perhaps they were no longer quite enemies either. It was progress, small but real, and he would take what he could get. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of tasks, feeding animals, repairing a fence, hauling supplies. By the time Emma called an end to the workday, Alexander was filthy, exhausted, and in more pain than he could remember experiencing in years. Every muscle ached. His hands were raw despite the gloves, and he suspected he would barely be able to move tomorrow. But underneath the physical discomfort was something else, something that felt almost like satisfaction. He had worked, really worked with his hands and his body, producing tangible results that would benefit the farm and its operation. It was a small thing, insignificant in the grand scheme, but it felt more real than anything he had accomplished in his office, more meaningful than any deal he had closed or profit he had generated. This was honest labor, connected to the physical world in ways his previous work never had been. Emma found him sitting on the porch steps, too tired to make it all the way back to the house. She sat beside him without comment, both of them watching the sun set over the fields in shades of orange and purple. "You survived day one," she observed. "I wasn't entirely sure you would." "I'm not sure I did," Alexander replied, too exhausted for false bravado. "Every part of me hurts. I don't think I've ever been this tired in my life." "It gets easier," Emma assured him. "Your body adapts, builds strength and endurance. In a few weeks, you'll barely notice work that seems impossible now." "If I last a few weeks," he said, only half joking. "If you last a few weeks," she agreed. They sat in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching darkness creep across the landscape. It was comfortable, this quiet companionship, asking nothing more than presence. "You did well today," Emma said eventually. "James said you took direction without complaint, worked hard despite obvious discomfort. That's more than I expected, honestly." "Low bar," Alexander observed dryly. "Earned bar," Emma corrected. "You don't have a great track record for sustained commitment to things that don't come easily, but maybe that's changing. Maybe you're changing." "I hope so," he said quietly. "I really do. Because if this doesn't work, if I can't find satisfaction here, then I don't know where else to look." The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm of physical labor and gradual acceptance. Alexander learned the farm's routines, the particular needs of each season and situation. He rose before dawn and worked until dusk, his body transforming from the soft physique of desk work to something leaner and harder. The blisters on his hands became calluses. The aching muscles strengthened, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to move through the work with something approaching competence. His presence on the farm was no longer quite the novelty it had been. The initial skepticism of the other workers had mellowed into cautious acceptance as he proved himself willing to tackle the dirtiest jobs without complaint, to ask genuine questions rather than assume expertise, to show up day after day despite obvious discomfort and the allure of his previous life beckoning from the phone. He increasingly left ignored in his room. Maria had begun including him in her kitchen conversations. Tom sought his opinion on repair work, and even Sarah, the most reserved of the group, had smiled at him once when he successfully delivered a difficult goat kid without assistance. James remained cordial but distant, his feelings for Emma rendering true friendship impossible. Alexander understood and did not push, content to maintain professional courtesy while secretly hoping that Emma would finally acknowledge James's devotion and allow herself to be loved. It would hurt watching that relationship develop, but he recognized that his own pain was irrelevant compared to Emma's happiness. He had forfeited his claim on her heart through his own choices, and the most loving thing he could do now was step aside gracefully. Emma herself remained an enigma, friendly but guarded, treating him with the same professional courtesy she extended to all her workers. They rarely spoke of anything personal, their conversations confined to tasks and schedules and the mundane practicalities of farm operation. Sometimes Alexander caught her watching him with an unreadable expression, but she always looked away when noticed, maintaining the careful distance that prevented any recurrence of intimacy or vulnerability. He had called his attorney during the second week, initiating the process of selling his stake in the company. The conversation had been difficult, Thomas alternating between disbelief and concern for Alexander's mental health. "You're having a breakdown," Thomas had said bluntly. "This is classic burnout behavior. Take a vacation, see a therapist, but don't make irrevocable decisions while you're in this state." But Alexander had been firm, perhaps more firm than he had been about anything in years. "I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference." And if Thomas remained unconvinced, Alexander could not bring himself to care. He had spent too long living for others' approval, measuring his worth by external validation. This decision was his alone, and he would live with its consequences, whatever they might be. The sale moved forward with agonizing slowness, mired in legal complications and board resistance. His partners believed he was making a catastrophic mistake, that he would regret abandoning everything they had built together. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps he would wake 6 months hence, filled with regret and recrimination. But he doubted it. The longer he spent on the farm, the more alien his previous life seemed. Like a costume he had worn for so long, he had forgotten it was not his actual skin. November gave way to December, bringing true cold and the first significant snowfall. Alexander learned to drive the tractor, to operate the snowplow, to break ice on water troughs, and ensure the animals had adequate shelter and food. The work was harder in winter, demanding constant vigilance against the cold's potential for disaster. A frozen pipe could mean catastrophe. A heating failure in the chicken coop could result in significant loss. He began to understand the anxiety that underlay farm life, the constant awareness of vulnerability to forces beyond human control. Christmas approached with little fanfare. Emma explained that the farm operated on reduced schedule during the holidays, but never truly stopped. Animals still required care, regardless of the calendar. Alexander had no family to visit, no obligations beyond the ones he had chosen to accept here, and he found himself strangely content with the prospect of spending the holiday working. On Christmas Eve, Emma surprised them all by declaring the evening off, insisting that everyone gather at the main house for dinner. Alexander helped Maria and Sarah prepare the meal, learning to cook dishes far removed from his usual takeout or restaurant fare. There was something deeply satisfying about the communal effort, the kitchen full of people and conversation and laughter, the shared purpose of creating something meant to be enjoyed together. They ate by candlelight, the electricity deliberately turned off to simulate a simpler time. Emma had decorated sparingly, a small tree in the corner, evergreen boughs on the mantel, candles that cast warm, flickering shadows. It was beautiful in its simplicity, more genuinely festive than any of the elaborate corporate holiday parties Alexander had attended in his previous life. After dinner, Tom produced a guitar and began playing folk songs that everyone seemed to know except Alexander. He listened, feeling simultaneously included and apart, grateful to be present but aware of his status as newcomer, as someone who did not yet quite belong to this chosen family. Emma caught his eye across the room and smiled, a genuine expression, free of the guardedness that usually characterized her interactions with him, and his heart contracted with an emotion he dared not name. Later, when the others had drifted off to their respective homes and quarters, Alexander helped Emma clean the kitchen. They worked in companionable silence, the ease of long practice making words unnecessary. When the last dish was dried and put away, Emma poured 2 glasses of wine and gestured toward the living room where the fire still burned bright. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, the space between them both literal and metaphorical. Emma stared into the fire for a long moment before speaking. "You've surprised me," she said finally. "I didn't think you'd last 2 weeks, much less 2 months. But you're still here, still showing up, still trying. That means something." "Does it?" Alexander asked, afraid to hope that her acknowledgement indicated anything beyond simple observation. Or am I just being stubborn, too proud to admit defeat? "Maybe both," Emma allowed. "But I've been watching you, Alexander. I've seen you change. Not just physically, though that's obvious enough, but something deeper. You're more present now, more aware of the people and world around you, less trapped in your own head." "This place does that," he said. "The work demands presence. You can't be thinking about tomorrow's meeting while mucking stalls or delivering kids. You have to be here now, or you'll hurt yourself or the animals." "It's more than that," Emma insisted. "It's a choice you're making, consciously or not, to engage with life rather than simply manage it. That's the difference between who you were and who you're becoming." Alexander turned to face her fully, emboldened by the wine and the intimacy of the moment. "Is there a version of becoming that includes you? Not as we were, I know that's impossible, but as something new, something built on who we are now rather than who we were then?" Emma's expression was sad and tender in equal measure. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants that, wants to believe that we could start fresh, try again with all we've learned. But another part is terrified of being hurt again, of trusting you, and having you decide that this life isn't enough after all. I understand that fear, Alexander said quietly. I've been afraid too. Afraid that I'll fail at this, that I'll prove incapable of sustaining commitment to something that doesn't offer the constant validation I became addicted to. Afraid that the emptiness I've been running from will follow me here, proving that geography and occupation were never the problem. Has it? Emma asked. Followed you here? He considered the question seriously, examining his internal landscape with honest attention. No, he said slowly, or not in the same way. I still have moments of doubt, times when I wonder if I'm deluding myself, but the pervasive sense of meaninglessness, of going through motions without genuine purpose, that's gone. I feel useful here, connected to something real and immediate and important. It's not always pleasant, and it's certainly not glamorous, but it's authentic in a way nothing else has been. Emma nodded, as if this confirmed something she had suspected. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Something I've been hiding since you arrived. Alexander's heart began to race, anticipation and dread mixing in his chest. All right, Emma stood abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out into the darkness. The reason I've been keeping distance, the reason I've been so careful about not letting you too close. It's not just about protecting myself from being hurt again. She turned to face him, and in the firelight he could see tears on her cheeks. I have a daughter, Alexander, a 4-year-old daughter named Lily. She's with her grandmother right now, spending the holiday in Boston. But she lives here with me, and she's the reason I couldn't take risks with you, couldn't let myself believe that you might stay. The revelation struck him like a physical blow, reorganizing everything he thought he understood about Emma's life and choices. A daughter. Emma had a daughter, a child who must have been born not long after he left, who represented a whole dimension of her existence he had been completely unaware of. Questions flooded his mind. Who was the father? Why had she never mentioned this? What did it mean for any potential future between them? But he forced them aside, recognizing that this moment required something other than his need for information. Tell me about her, he said instead, keeping his voice gentle, inviting rather than demanding. Emma's expression softened, the way it always did when people spoke of their children. She's remarkable, curious and fearless, and so full of life it sometimes overwhelms me. She wants to know how everything works, why things are the way they are. She talks to the animals, like they understand every word, and maybe they do. She's the reason I've built all this. The reason I couldn't fail or give up when things got difficult. Everything I do for her. Who's her father? Alexander asked, unable to contain the question any longer. No one you know, Emma replied. Someone I met a few months after you left, when I was still trying to figure out how to be alone. It was brief, intense, ultimately unsustainable. He wasn't ready to be a father, and I wasn't about to force the issue. So I came back here to the farm, and I've been raising her on my own. With help from Maria and the others, of course. It takes a village, as they say. Alexander processed this information, sorting through his complex reactions. Relief that Emma had not immediately found someone to replace him. Shame at feeling relief when she had clearly struggled. Respect for her strength in choosing single motherhood over an unsuitable partnership. And underneath it all, a question he was afraid to articulate even to himself. Could he be part of this? Could he accept Emma's daughter, help raise a child that was not his own, become the kind of man who could handle that responsibility? When will she be back? He asked, carefully neutral. Day after tomorrow, Emma replied. I need to know, Alexander, before she returns, before she meets you. Is this real? Your commitment to this life, to this place? Because if you're still figuring it out, still testing whether you can tolerate rural life and manual labor, then you need to keep your distance from Lily. I won't have her forming attachments to people who might disappear. She's already dealt with one absent father. I won't subject her to another. The implicit question hung between them, momentous and terrifying. Was he ready to be not just Emma's partner, but a father figure to her child? Could he make that commitment, knowing that backing out later would damage not just Emma, but an innocent child who deserved better. "I'm staying," he said, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised him. "I don't know yet what that means for us, for any potential relationship between us, but I'm staying on the farm, continuing this work, building this life. And if that eventually includes a role in Lily's life, I promise you, I promise on everything I have, that I won't abandon her. I won't be another person who disappoints her." Emma studied his face for a long moment, searching for truth, or perhaps for cracks in his conviction. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. "All right, when she comes home, I'll introduce you as someone who works on the farm. Let her get to know you naturally, without pressure or expectations. And we'll see what develops." They talked long into the night, Emma sharing stories of Lily's short life, the difficult pregnancy, the terrifying birth, the exhausting first year of motherhood navigated largely alone. She spoke of her daughter's first words, her first steps, the way she approached the world with absolute confidence in her right to exist in it. Alexander listened, asking questions, trying to imagine this small person who had become the center of Emma's universe. Eventually, Emma's words grew slower, her eyelids heavy. Alexander stood, gathering their empty wine glasses. "You should sleep," he said gently. "You've had an emotional day." "We both have," Emma replied, but she did not argue, allowing him to help her to her feet. They stood close for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility and restraint. Alexander wanted to kiss her, wanted to close the distance and reclaim some fraction of what they had lost. But this was not the moment, not when she was tired and vulnerable, and they had just navigated such delicate emotional territory. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand and stepped back. "Thank you for telling me. About Lily, about everything. Thank you for staying," Emma replied, "for not running when things got complicated." He climbed the stairs to his room, no longer the guest room, but simply his room, the space he had claimed through persistent presence, and lay awake for hours, mind churning with the day's revelations. A daughter. Emma had a daughter, and if things progressed between them, he would become part of that child's life, accepting responsibilities he had never imagined for himself. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, another leap into unknown territory. 2 days later, Lily came home. Alexander heard her before he saw her, a high, clear voice calling for her mother as a car door slammed in the driveway. He was in the barn, mucking stalls, as had become his routine, and he froze, suddenly gripped by irrational fear. What if she didn't like him? What if his presence made her uncomfortable, disrupted the careful balance of life Emma had constructed? He forced himself to continue working, to let Emma handle the reunion without his interference. But curiosity eventually won, and he found himself drifting toward the house, drawn by the sound of laughter and animated conversation. Through the kitchen window he could see them, Emma holding a small girl with dark curls and her mother's grey eyes, both of them smiling with uncomplicated joy. The back door opened, and Lily burst through it with the unstoppable energy of children who have been cooped up too long. She stopped short when she saw Alexander, regarding him with frank curiosity. "Who are you?" she demanded, no shyness in her direct gaze. "I'm Alexander," he replied, crouching to her level, remembering advice about engaging children at their eye level. "I work here on the farm with your mom." "Are you a farmer?" Lily asked, stepping closer to examine him critically. "You don't look like a farmer. Farmers have beards and wear overalls." "Not all farmers," Alexander said, charmed despite his nervousness. "Some farmers wear regular clothes and can't grow proper beards." But this logic appeared to satisfy her. "Do you know about animals?" "I'm learning," Alexander admitted. "Your mum and James and the others have been teaching me. Would you like to show me the animals? I bet you know much more about them than I do." Lily considered this offer seriously, then nodded decisively. "Okay, but we have to see the goats first. I've been gone for 3 whole days, and they probably missed me." She took his hand with complete trust, and Alexander felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. This small person, knowing nothing about him beyond his name and occupation, had simply accepted his presence and claimed his attention. There was something profound in that acceptance, something that spoke to the resilience and openness of children, their capacity to take people as they are rather than as they're supposed to be. They spent the next hour touring the farm, Lily providing running commentary on every animal, every building, every piece of equipment. She corrected his terminology, educated him on the particular personalities of individual goats and chickens, and shared complex theories about what the animals were thinking. Alexander listened with genuine fascination, not to the content so much as to the absolute confidence with which this 4-year-old navigated her world. Emma watched from a distance, pretending to work, but clearly monitoring the interaction. When Lily finally exhausted herself and demanded lunch, running ahead toward the house, Emma approached Alexander with a tentative smile. "She likes you," Emma observed. "That's not always a given. She's usually more reserved with strangers." "She's remarkable," Alexander replied honestly, "like her mother." They walked back to the house together, Lily chattering ahead of them about what she wanted for lunch and whether Alexander could stay and whether they could go see the goats again after eating. The domesticity of the moment struck Alexander with sudden force. This was what he had been missing, what no amount of business success could provide. Not romance or drama or grand gestures, but simply this, walking beside someone he cared about, discussing lunch plans while a child played ahead of them. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Alexander's work continued, but now it included Lily's frequent presence, her questions and observations and demands for attention. He found himself looking forward to her appearances in the barn, her excited reports about school or playmates, or the fascinating behavior of the farm's animals. Emma had been right. Children demanded presence, demanded that you engage with the immediate moment rather than drift into abstraction. His relationship with Emma shifted subtly, warming by degrees as she witnessed his genuine care for Lily, his willingness to read bedtime stories and answer impossible questions and play elaborate games of make-believe. They began having dinner together most evenings. The three of them gathered around the kitchen table like a family, though neither adult articulated that word. In January, the sale of his company finally completed. Alexander signed the papers in Emma's kitchen, watched by Tom, who served as witness, officially divesting himself of the entity he had spent 5 years building. He felt no regret, only relief, as if setting down a burden he had carried for far too long. The money from the sale sat in his account, more than he could reasonably spend in several lifetimes, but it seemed irrelevant to his actual life. He was wealthy in ways that transcended currency, wealthy in relationships, in meaningful work, in the gradual building of something that mattered. In February, during a particularly brutal cold snap, Emma invited him to move into the main house. "You'll freeze in that room above the barn," she said practically. "And it's silly to have you taking meals here but sleeping elsewhere. There's a spare room on the ground floor. It's yours if you want it." He wanted it. Wanted the proximity to Emma and Lily. Wanted to be part of the household rather than merely adjacent to it. He moved his meager possessions. He had accumulated surprisingly few things in his months on the farm, and began sleeping in the room that smelled of lavender and old wood, listening to the house settle around him, to Emma moving about upstairs, to Lily's occasional nighttime excursions for water or reassurance. One night in March, Emma came to his door. Alexander was reading by lamplight, trying to understand a complex agricultural text about sustainable farming practices, when her knock interrupted. She entered without waiting for invitation, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. "Lily's asleep," she said, as if this explained her presence. "I wanted to talk to you, really talk without little ears listening." Alexander set aside his book, his heart beginning to race. "All right." Emma sat on the edge of his bed, close enough to touch but not touching. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what this is becoming. You've been here almost 5 months now. You've proven that you're committed to this life, to the farm, to Lily. And I find that I'm ready to trust you again, or at least to try." "Emma," he began. but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I'm not the girl you left 5 years ago. I'm a mother now with responsibilities and priorities that will always supersede romance. If we try this, if we attempt a relationship, you need to understand that Lily comes first, always, and I need to know that you can accept that you won't resent her for taking precedence." "I would never resent her," Alexander said firmly. "She's extraordinary, Emma. Being part of her life, watching her grow and learn, it's a privilege, not a burden." "And what about when it's hard?" Emma pressed. "When she's sick in the middle of the night, or having tantrums, or demanding attention at inconvenient moments. When being a parent means sacrifice and exhaustion and constant vigilance. Then I'll do what needs doing," Alexander replied simply. "I'm not under any illusions about parenthood being easy or always pleasant. But I've discovered something these past months. I don't need easy, I need meaningful. And helping raise your daughter, being part of her life, would be among the most meaningful things I could possibly do." Emma searched his face, looking for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, she leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative, a question rather than a declaration. Alexander responded carefully, letting her control the pace and depth, aware that this moment represented trust given rather than trust assumed. When they finally broke apart, Emma rested her forehead against his, both of them breathing hard. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Terrified of being hurt again, of making another mistake, of letting Lily get attached to someone who might leave." "I'm terrified too," Alexander admitted. "Terrified of failing you, of proving inadequate to the role you're offering. But I think that's part of love, isn't it? Being afraid and choosing to trust anyway." "Is that what this is?" Emma asked. "Love?" Alexander considered the question seriously. Was it love, this feeling that had been building over months of proximity and shared purpose? It felt different from what they had experienced 5 years ago, less intense but somehow more solid, built on mutual respect and genuine knowledge of each other rather than idealized projections. "Yes," he said finally. "I think it is. Not the same love we had before, but something better. Something that accounts for who we actually are rather than who we imagined each other to be." Emma smiled then, genuine and unguarded, and kissed him again with more confidence. They sat together on his narrow bed, talking until dawn about their hopes and fears, their plans for the farm's future, their concerns about Lily's reaction to their changing relationship. It was not the passionate reconciliation of romance novels, but something better. Two adults carefully negotiating the terms of a partnership that acknowledged complexity and responsibility alongside desire. In the morning, they told Lily together, explaining as best one could to a 4-year-old that Alexander would be staying permanently, that he and her mother cared for each other in a special way. Lily accepted this information with the equanimity of children who adapt easily to changing circumstances, more concerned with whether Alexander would still have time to play with her than with the adult relationship itself. Spring arrived, bringing with it the intense work of planting and the arrival of new life on the farm. Alexander helped deliver kids and chicks, planted seedlings in the greenhouse, repaired winter damage to fences and buildings. He worked alongside Emma and James and the others, no longer quite the novice, but not yet truly expert, occupying that middle ground of competence that comes from sustained practice. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching Lily play in the yard, Emma took his hand. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Really happy, not just telling yourself you should be." Alexander considered the question, examining his internal landscape with the same honest attention he had learned to apply to physical tasks. Was he happy? The word seemed almost too simple for what he felt, a complex mixture of satisfaction and challenge, of belonging and ongoing effort, of love and responsibility, and the daily choice to show up fully present. "Yes," he said finally, "I'm happy in a way I didn't know was possible. This isn't the life I imagined for myself, and it's certainly not easier than what I left behind. But it's real, Emma. It's mine in a way nothing else ever was. built by my own hands and choices rather than inherited expectations or external validation. No regrets? Emma pressed. Not even about the company, the money, the status you gave up? None, Alexander replied, meaning it absolutely. I'd trade all of it 1,000 times over for this, for you, for Lily, for the work we do here. I was wealthy before, but I wasn't rich. Now I am. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors, and Alexander felt something settle in his chest, some final piece clicking into place. He had come here seeking absolution, hoping to undo past mistakes or at least understand them. Instead, he had found something better, a chance to become someone new, to build a life worth living rather than simply worth broadcasting. James appeared from the barn, calling out that one of the does was in labor and Emma's expertise was needed. She kissed Alexander quickly and hurried off, leaving him alone with Lily, who immediately demanded his attention for some elaborate game involving chickens and imaginary kingdoms. He played along, feeling foolish and utterly content in equal measure. This was his life now, not the one he had planned, but the one he had chosen, built from mistakes and second chances and the radical act of showing up day after day. He was no longer the millionaire who had everything but meaning. He was simply Alexander, farmer and partner and chosen father, wealthy beyond measure in all the ways that actually mattered. And as Lily laughed at his terrible chicken impressions and Emma's voice drifted from the barn, giving calm, confident instructions, he knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found his way home.